8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is Liam Hendricks, and you're watching Crosstown, Crosstalk on the Barroom Network.
Some may find the following disturbing. Discretion is advised.
Every summer in Chicago, the sunshine spotlights the city's spectacular skyline. Its luxurious lakeshore, marvelous monuments, and the over 200 neighborhoods in the city. And it also brings to light two of the greatest sports franchises in the world. On the north side, it's the Cubs. On the south side, it's the White Sox. This is Crosstown Crosstalk.
Hello and welcome to another very exciting episode of Crosstown Crosstalk, presented by the Barroom Network. My name is Vinnie Parise, and I am super stoked about today. Today is one of the greatest days on the entire sports calendar. Yes, we love baseball. This is a baseball show. Yes, we love hockey. We have Bar Down Talking Hockey coming at you, me and Frank Mueller, every Wednesday. We're talking hockey all year long. That show doesn't stop. We got football galore here at the Barroom Network, and today is the first day of the NFL season. We will see the Kansas City Chiefs raise their Super Bowl banner the second time in 3 years against the Chicago Bears' biggest rival, not their biggest rival, one of their biggest rivals, the Detroit Lions. Very much looking forward to seeing how that shakes out. But before the Barroom Network and all of you dive into your football, I got to get here to talk about some baseball for just a little bit. And there's nobody that on Thursday, September 7th of the year of our good Lord 2023, I would rather bring on this show than a friend of the program who's been on multiple times. I don't think I've had anybody more, to be quite frank with you. It's because I truly enjoy their knowledge and their insight. Of course, I'm talking about Phil Selig from CubaDugout.com, the inventor of CubaDugout.com, and the Canadian Cuban baseball and American team enthusiast.
Sure.
I tried to make that.
I think that qualifies.
Tried to make that sound clever, but I'm not clever.
So. To make it sound a little bit more robust than it might be, but I appreciate it. And hola a todos, la gente on Chicago. So
very much look forward to having you.
I think I mixed
in
some French there. So
yeah, that sounded like you're definitely from Ottawa, trying to associate yourself with the Cuban people. And I love what you do, Phil. I'm a huge fan. I know I say that every show. I probably sound like a broken record at this point. But, when I think about like, hey, what's a good show that I could put on for the audience? And I'm like, okay, people are always interested in hearing what Phil has to say. And you went on a trip recently. And that's kind of where I want to start this whole thing off, because I've been anxious to hear about what you had going on that trip. I have many questions. Since the day I found out but you were leaving, and then I said, when you come back, we'll talk. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. Hello to Foster and everybody else in the online chat. Phil, what was the initial point of going on your trip to Cuba?
Well, I think, did we last talk in the lead up to the World Baseball Classic?
I think the last time you were on, Cuba was down 2-0 in their group play, and they came all the way back to advance.
Okay, so it's been obviously a very busy year that way, and not long after, and spoiler alert, Cuba did advance to the semifinal, which I did predict, just not necessarily the path that they took, and I think if it's on the record, I didn't like their chances midstream versus at the beginning. But so actually, very good this year that I was able to bookend the season. So I was in Havana for the season opener in late March, which was in the aftermath of the World Baseball Classic, and then more recently, about a month ago, was able to venture to Havana and Las Tunas for the Cuban National Series final. And so, that's a bit of a bucket list, although in typical Cuban fashion, I perhaps didn't get to take in as much baseball as I would have liked to, but was definitely still an experience and saw a lot of positivity towards the back end of the season that I thought was lacking during that first trip.
That's awesome. I'm so happy to hear that for you. Now, when you went and saw some of those games, what team, and obviously the largely American audience that we have here with a little bit of Canadian sprinkled in might not know exactly what's going on in terms of the league that you went to observe. What's a team that sticks out when you think about your trip?
So the final was contested between the Las Tunas Leñadores, who, for reference, the biggest name that they've produced is Yordan Alvarez, although he played just for a short time while he was there. So they ended up capturing their second championship in the past 4 years, and they faced off against Industriales of Havana, who are the Yankees of Cuban baseball, in that they have the most championships with 12, but similar to the Yankees, have not won a championship since 2010. So their rise, their return to the finals, their first time since they last captured the championship, was not predictable either. At about the third way mark of the season, they were in dead last, and so they went on a bit of a miraculous run, and so. I try not to pick favorites as it goes, but my trips have taken me largely to Havana, and in that time I've gotten to know a lot of the players. So it was definitely a motivator in looking at it. If this was going to be the opportunity, and the timing's kind of worked on a personal level to get there, that I might not get another chance to see Industriales get back. And as mentioned, unfortunately they didn't take the title. But when you look at where they were. Kind of earlier in the season, it was impressive to get there, and it was it's glad that I could go support them, grab photo and video, and be a part of kind of a bucket list item for me.
And you could go to cubadugout.com to check out a lot of those photos and some of Phil's content that he created from his visit to Havana. Is there a player that was on either of those teams that you're like, wow, that could be the next Yordan Alvarez, or hey, this guy is going to be a top flight international free agent like a Luis Robert Jr. or a Yohan Moncada back in the day? Does anybody stick out like that when I ask you that question?
I think that window has passed, and so what this represented, and in terms of storylines, was probably a little bit more rich for those that are engaged more in the culture than necessarily where I have been lucky in the past to see a number of those players. So for me, what it was interesting to see that a Danel Castro, who and more recently became the all-time Cuban hit king at 47, soon to be 48 years old, still playing at a high level, which at the same time, might give you an idea of kind of where the league is. But when you look at that, a guy who's played for 30 years and is still contributing, was interesting to me. So Las Tunas had a lot of veteran sluggers as it goes, and that's probably why they kind of rose, because I don't think the expectations weren't super high for them at the beginning of the year. We kind of figured that when they won their championship a few years ago, they've kept that core together. 4 years can be an eternity in baseball, but I guess in keeping that veteran approach and getting a couple of young arms is more what buoyed sort of the Industriales turnaround. I don't want to say that nobody is a prospect there. It's just I think right now the league and how it's structured is more kind of for the Cuban people and for an opportunity for guys to continue to develop, and hopefully, as we saw, play in the World Baseball Classic, maybe get professional contracts playing, for instance, in Canada or in they have sent a couple players to Dominican, although that historically was a little bit of a different pipeline, down to Mexico, down to Panama, those sorts of leagues. Whereas I think a lot of the younger players, the true prospects, are kind of skipping over that. They're leaving much younger and probably ending up on the Dominican shores at 15, 16 in time for the international signing period.
Got it. Very interesting. So when you build a team in this league, is it similar to the way Major League Baseball works, where, teams spend X amount of money and, in baseball, there's no salary cap, but there are in other sports in North America? I'm curious, how does a team have sustained success like that with the rules that are in place there?
Yeah. So historically, teams, there would be limited player movement. That has changed a little bit. So most of and this is a kind of a thing that I think buoys some of the passion that under the current structure. There have been multiple changes over the years. So like if someone were to nitpick, this period they had reinforcements, that by and large the guys do develop through their provincial program. That being said, for instance, like a Las Tunas, which is a smaller province, and basically, as I discovered, is a 14-hour bus ride from Havana, which was more comfortable than I thought it might be, but still not something I'd necessarily recommend. But so that's the beauty for the Leñadores, a team again who is comprised largely of guys from that province. Whereas, for an Industriales of Havana, yes, a lot are from the from that province, but they sometimes can stockpile a little bit. And some of the younger players that they brought in are kind of from adjacent provinces, Mayabeque, Artemisa. Whereas Matanzas, a team that I thought might have gone a little bit further, has built their program in repatriating or bringing back guys that have played at the major league level. Sorry, with one caveat, that a name that everyone should recognize, but unfortunately was unable to play in the final. He played in the semifinal. Was Yasmani Tomas, of course, signed a huge deal with Arizona and even hit 30 home runs in a season one time before getting caught in a little bit of a roster jam or being without a position or the perception that he was a quadruple A player. Did return to Industriales, but unfortunately missed the finals due to some gastronomical issues.
Very interesting. It's good information, Phil. So when you're sitting in the stands at a place like this, I don't know how many major league ballparks you visited in your career, but it's clear even just watching the games on TV that, Wrigley Field has a different perception than Guaranteed Rate Field. And then you got Tropicana down in Florida. A lot of people like Dodger Stadium, Yankee Stadium, Fenway Park. What are the vibes based on what you think about major league parks in comparison to these games that you're visiting in Cuba? Is it a college atmosphere? I don't know if you've ever been to the College Baseball World Series. I want to go next year. I'll see if I can make that happen. But, just talk to me through like the fan experience a little bit, the atmosphere.
Yeah, so I've been to probably about half the major league stadiums, and then tack on, myriad number of minor league stadiums as well. And so, in Las Tunas, which is very different than Industriales Latino Americano, the home of Industriales in Havana, Latino Americano Stadium, which unfortunately I didn't get to see a game this time, but I've been there, 15, 20 times, is the second largest stadium in all of the world behind Dodger Stadium. So when that sells out, is as loud as anything that you'll hear. At the beginning of the year, and actually kind of anecdotally that I saw that at the beginning of the year, I was there again. I was there for the season opener. There might have been 5,000, 6,000 people there. Whereas at least for when the series did shift for the two games in Havana, it looked like they were drawing bigger crowds, 30, 35,000. Now, more direct answer to the ambiance in Las Tunas, which is a smaller stadium, but probably about 14, 15,000 people, was jam-packed. The construction was a little bit goofy. There were a couple things that by North American standard would probably be a fire hazard. So it was a little bit difficult to move around. And so I guess one of the things that was good is I did have access on the field for a portion of it, but I was able to move around to certain parts and just kind of acted as if. But the parallel that I'll draw that in game one, while I was there, Las Tunas did take a late lead, and those 14,000 people were as loud as any stadium that I've been in, and that includes the World Series in Yankee Stadium and the NBA Finals in the Boston Garden.
Wow, Phil, you have a nice resume, a nice sports resume there. Wow, that's impressive. So I'm curious, and you can answer this like I'm a complete dummy, like I've never watched a baseball game before in my life. Obviously, I have. You have Major League Baseball. I think most people would assume that the champion of Major League Baseball would probably smoke the champion of any other league in the world, right? But where does this Cuban league that you just watched the championship for rank in terms of the other world leagues in the world? So obviously you have Major League Baseball at the top, but there's the KBO, leagues in Europe, Mexico, Dominican Republic. I'm sure there's leagues in other non-traditional markets, Canada. Where does this league kind of rank in terms of them all?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's tougher and tougher to make comparisons. I think it is interesting, and you have to acknowledge that it is kind of the largest sovereign league that exists, with 16 teams representing each province and comprised completely of national of Cuban talent. So, at this point, MLB number one, MPB number two, KBO number three, and then probably we look at Taiwan number four. At this point, the Cuban National Series might even be below a couple of the Mexican iterations, which have two seasons. So I'd say it's probably about the seventh or the eighth. Uniquely, what we will find out in a way, the World Baseball Softball Confederation later this month is going to be hosting their first kind of champion series, which is going to be kind of the independent pro league. So, for instance, I believe it's a team from the Frontier League, or no, the American Association. So Cuban contingent will be there. But it is interesting to note that what that team is going to be the Grandma team that won the 61st Cuban National Series, with enough reinforcements that has aggravated people that they're looking at and saying, you're trying to turn this into an iteration of the Cuban national team, but not really. So is it Grandma? And again, sometimes people, that's Grandma is the province, is the boat that Fidel made his way to Cuba on, not Grandma or Grandpa. And so a lot of people are looking at it saying there's a little bit of a manipulation. So it is very tough to gauge that. And that's why even when you look at the performance in the World Baseball Classic, that team versus, sort of what the Cuban national team is for other tournaments, it's always key to watch what contingent they are sending if you are trying to establish expectations, which in fairness is probably not hugely different than the Dominican Republic, for the sake that when you look at the Dominican national team that goes to the World Baseball Classic, which is loaded with pro talent, that that's why they kind of in the world rankings are probably lower than you would expect, because when they go to these other tournaments, a lot of times it's and I don't want to slag on anybody, but it's kind of that talent that's not in the system. So I don't want to say it's guys that's left, but the guys that are playing for the Dominican national team are a little bit different than the WBC. So Cuba's kind of somewhere in between there at this point, where we've seen all of that professional talent. I mean, a lot of it's in Chicago, whereas the national team in certain tournaments does better, and it depends on the configuration. Also depends on who's available, because there's a lot of other guys that are playing in Japan and are allowed to come back, but are making good money there. So that's their priority, or playing in Mexico. And so it's if at any given point you kind of look and see where the top Cuban talent is around the world, it is interspersed kind of everywhere.
I do think it's funny that the whole thing you mentioned this Frontier League, and earlier in the regular season, I had gone to a Schaumburg Boomers game, and you commented. I posted some pictures on Facebook, and you commented, "Love that," and you had something to say about like the Cubans and their involvement with this whole Frontier League. First of all, what's your overall thoughts on the Frontier League? I don't know like the extent of it. I've never actually really truly researched what I was watching when I was at Frontier League games. I'm genuinely curious about this league, your thoughts on it, and the Cuban connection.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a soft spot for it, for the sake that a level of my access has grown through the Can-Am, which merged into the Frontier League. So for those who don't know, the Frontier League and the American Association represent basically the largest independent leagues in the world, I guess, but especially in North America. So especially with a few years ago with the minor league, I guess the rationalization of teams, because we've seen a couple of smaller teams kind of jump in. We've also seen the talent level that has grown there. So in a lot of years we saw and more. So for Ottawa, who had the Ottawa champions, and so my documentary, which was screened at the Baseball Hall of Fame a few years ago, tells a level of that story, connecting those dots, and specifically with a gentleman named Alexander Maeta, who came to play here, who is one of the all-time greats for Industrialis, a top player, and really, but for circumstance or maybe if he had gotten out, could have been one of those names, could have been up there with so many during that same era, the Cespedes of the world, the Abreu's, that kind of thing. So it really is. It is a solid level of baseball. especially in a world where minor league baseball is rationalized and kind of cut down on, was it 36 or 32 teams. So for kind of those mid markets, it is an entertainment product onto its own, but make no mistake about it, it's a decent level of ball with a lot of guys that either were drafted, got hurt. Unfortunately, this year we didn't see the Cuban talent in the Frontier League as we have before, and most of the time that is the Canadian teams. Obviously, it's a little bit easier with everything, and then just the visa requirements to be able to travel over the border. But even so, last year we saw that the Quebec Capitals won the Frontier League championship, and they had two players in Jordan Mandalay, who was the shortstop, and people may or may not recognize he was the starting shortstop for Cuba during the famous game against the Tampa Bay Rays. And then we also had Yoelkis Guibert, who, and this is kind of funny, was released late last season by Quebec, and then parlayed that into a big performance, or at least a clutch performance, coming through with a couple of the big hits to help Cuba advance in the World Baseball Classic. So I'm hoping that pipeline opens up down the road. It is a little bit tougher these days, and some of that might just have been visa, or teams look at and go, is the expense worth it? But that pipeline, both and I guess just for simplicity, for Frontier, where that's where I've gotten the access to many of the Cuban national teams of the past, many of the players, and it's helped me to forge some of those relationships that now, when I see them in Cuba, are how I get some of my access.
Very interesting. I'm looking at it right now. It actually looks like the Schaumburg Boomers were just eliminated yesterday. I don't know if I'm reading this right. I'm not going to say I'm not smart, because I can't realize that. It was 2 days ago, it looks like. That's crazy.
Yeah, their playoffs are going on right now. So I believe, and I think in the other bracket, the Quebec Capitals are waiting for, or the play-in game might have already happened between New Jersey and New York, the Rockland Boulder. So and for, I think actually Chicago has a lot of representation, that there's 2 or 3 teams kind of just on the outskirts or within kind of the Chicagoland area, which is interesting. You might be able to speak better to that in terms of what the attendance was or what stadium they were playing at. But overall, it's a pretty decent product as it goes for an unaffiliated league.
Yeah, it actually. I don't know if this is Evansville in Illinois, but if that's Evansville
I believe
Otters.
it is. Yeah.
And then the Joliet Slammers to go in addition to the Schaumburg Boomers. So, yeah, that's awesome. I've been to many, many Boomers games in my life, and they were the Schaumburg Flyers before that. But, yeah, it's really cool. And I hope people – this is kind of encouraging me to go check them out more often. And you were correct. It was the Quebec team is looking at now I lost it. The Quebec team is in the playoffs, and I think they're playing New Jersey now. So that'll be interesting.
Right. They finished 1-2 and they were the 2 strongest teams, so that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm interested in who ends up winning the whole thing now. So let's move on over to some of the Cuban players that made their way into Major League Baseball and have been stars for a long time, or trying to be stars for a long time. Is it fair to say that Luis Robert Jr. of the Chicago White Sox has been the best Cuban player in Major League Baseball this season?
Well, so it's a tough call. I mean, it's good to see that he's finally healthy. This looks like it's going to be his first full season, and there's a lot to like there. The power's been good. The average is kind of it's not bad. Let's put it that way. It's for 270, 35 home runs, but I think the health is the key thing. I believe we talked about, what the White Sox expectations were going into the season. And unfortunately, the one caveat of expecting rebounds from a number of players hasn't truly come to fruition, but that can't fall at his feet. He's probably the one guy that has rebounded. And so with that in mind, at 25, and sometimes you forget because he signed that long ago and he's been up for a while, that he is still only 25, is starting to show on some of that promise. Unfortunately, it's been a very inconsistent season. But with that in mind, in the majors this year, we're seeing that Jose Adolis Garcia is having a big year for the Texas Rangers, and Jorge Soler has been kind of resurgent for the Marlins, who were in the fight for a while. And similarly, I think Yordan Alvarez is probably still the best Cuban hitter in the game right now, but has missed some time. But when he's been in there, is is as dangerous and as anyone, and probably as important to any team with grand aspirations in this season.
I love hearing that about Jordan. And listen, the Astros have kind of been like, I kind of view them the way I view like a silent assassin, right? Like they've just kind of flown under the radar. They haven't been very noisy. They actually got off to a rough start. Altuve got hurt in the World Baseball Classic, and now they look like they could be like getting a bye. And I don't know if they're going to catch the Orioles in the standings, but like they're kind of putting themselves past the Rangers. We'll see what the Mariners can do. Jose Abreu has been a big part of the team this year in terms of just being there. I'm not certain he's the go-to guy like he once was in Chicago by any means, but you got to be pretty cool seeing Jose Abreu finally playing on a winning team that has a chance once October starts.
And it's a tough call. I think we discussed that when roughly around the time that he signed that as much as you would have liked to see him stay with Chicago, and I would say overall the numbers have been a little underwhelming for Houston, maybe relative to the dollars. So, I'm glad to see him get the payday. The fact of the matter is what he probably represents, as you say, if that's a team that can get healthy and can figure it out going into the playoffs, is still, even though his power's down and his average is down, is still producing at a decent RBI clip for how his production is overall. And so that guy that is going to give you a competitive at bat when you need it, or a professional at bat, especially in that playoff environment, is just the type of guy that you look at if they plan on going on an extended playoff run is perfect. Now, that being said, do I want to see how he looks at the rest of that contract, or pay those dollars at the rest of the contract? But that's kind of the game that you play, and the risk that you take in signing players over 30 years of age or over 35 to long-term contracts.
There are a lot of baseball people in the world that don't value the RBI statistic as much as they once did. I'm kind of in the middle. I think if you have a lot of RBIs, that probably means you're contributing to wins on a good team. But for some reason, Jose Abreu, he kind of like makes me second guess the RBI statistic a little bit, because his RBIs are always through the roof. He could be having a terrible season and he's a lock for 80 RBIs. It's strange to me. And then you got a guy like Luis Robert, who's probably going to hit 40 dingers this year, and he probably won't break 80 RBIs and is it because the White Sox suck? Is it because Abreu's clutch? Is it because the Astros are awesome and in front of him are some big dogs swinging the bat, and he's always got men on base? So when he does hit 220, those 22 hits out of 100 are coming with people on base. What is it about the Abreu that you think makes him such an RBI machine?
Well, it's lies, damn lies, and statistics, and I'm not going to lie and say that I don't fall prey to it at certain points. That and that's a level of what I think started the analytic movement, but where it can get lost is looking at it and saying, so this guy puts up big numbers. Okay, so you've got an idea that anybody that knocks in 100, 125, 100, when you get into 130 runs, that sort of thing, that this guy is consistently delivering. But that being said, that's no prediction of how the guy's going to deliver in a close game and in a close scenario when you need him. And even there's really no way to project that other than to see what happens. So I think that's where, like, again, an Abreu, where if you're in that scenario, you want a guy who's just going to do what he can to get runs across. I think that's the biggest change, where if it's launch angle, if guys just kind of swinging for the fences all the time, versus a guy who grew up in a different era, different system. But still, obviously, can mash one when he needs to. But basically, his approach is to do what it takes to put bat to ball, to do what he needs to move that runner along, to move it in. And that seems like that approach is a little bit lost. Maybe it's because guys don't get paid for it. Most people, myself included, are incentivized by what happens with their wallet. But I think that what gets lost in that is that's not necessarily, it can be exciting baseball, but it's not necessarily winning baseball. And so if you're playing the game to win arbitration versus playing the game to win the game, give me an Abreu over a Joey Gallo. The poor comparison, but kind of the first name that comes to mind of an all or nothing hitter that people find exciting. The tools are there, but like you said, and kind of looking at Rover's numbers, not to pile on him there, but if that's a byproduct of the White Sox just not putting anybody in front of them, 35 home runs, 71 RBIs, kind of looking to go, it's a little bit hollow, but maybe that is just because it's been such a down season. You're looking to say, okay, there's the one guy that we knew we wanted him to be a building block, but at least he's rebuilt some of that. And then kind of if the White Sox kind of retool around that, maybe those RBI numbers creep up. If they don't, then I think you've got a long-term problem.
100%. And Joe Mandel says in the chat, the Sox traded a guy that's probably hitting 40 dingers too. He was traded to a team that comes from an area with a heavy Cuban population. You think the Miami Marlins are able to sneak into the postseason?
I don't, and it's going to be it's going to be a dogfight to the very end. I think did they just shut down Alcantara? So that's a big blow. The fact that they hung around in the race for a team that kind of you weren't certain completely what they're doing, that they had young upside arms, then kind of threw some things at the wall, with some veteran bats and kind of overachieved. I just think that they're out of gas at this point.
Understood. They do hold a wild card spot as we stand today after being a little hot over the last week or so. But there's the San Francisco Giants, the Cincinnati Reds, and then I believe holding the final wild card spot is the Marlins. Yes, the Marlins. So, yeah, very interesting stuff. Phil, you've done great on the show so far today. I want to know, you grew up a Yankee fan, right?
Correct.
What the H happened to the Yankees? They're having this worst season of all time, and they're still probably going to end up over 500 and just missing the playoffs because they're getting hot right now.
Time is undefeated, and so going into the season, I had a lot of concerns. Was there a level? I mean, actually, in simple terms, if you look at after the hot start last year, they stopped playing at the All-Star break. And if the Marlins ran out of gas, then the Yankees would definitely run out of gas. There's a bit of bad luck. I don't like to rely on that. I mean, in groups with friends of mine, and they probably have a very valuable point on it, that if you look at the amount of time missed, Judge, Stanton, even Donaldson before they released him, if you want to subscribe to that being why he has gone into the tank. It was just everything that kind of went right in the first half of 2022 went wrong in 2023. But that being said, you look at the construction of that roster outside of where injuries definitely ravaged the pitching staff, but the pitching staff is still more than held its own. Just that offense is... It was incredibly flawed, and it seemed like old. So, I mean, there's reason for excitement right now, obviously, and I was surprised that the Yankees have committed to that youth movement. It didn't seem like they wanted to, and in fairness to that, with a Jason Dominguez, who it's tough to gauge these uber prospects, these 20-year-old kids when they come through, especially if you look at the first half of the season when he was in Double-A, and the numbers don't jump out at you. So that's why actually I like a baseball savant where you can go into a games log and kind of even break it down by months with a player that's 20 years old, that you can look and say, okay, so even if, again, those numbers don't jump off you, is his K-walk getting better? Is he showing you something? Is he showing that discipline? Is the average creeping up? And then sometimes with these guys, you just have to take the training wheel straight off, as we're perhaps, and I hope that we're seeing now, jumping up to that major league level, maybe. And I've wondered why this is, why a guy can come in and for those who aren't aware, and it's small sample size alert, but you could not have asked for a better start for the Martian since coming up, both for him specifically and the Yankees being on a 5-game winning streak. You look at it and go, is the minor league, is it some level of the lifestyle. Guys just don't get as excited about doing it as, just moving to living off a major league diet. Is it better? Is it the excitement of the crowd? Is it the fact that, in the minors sometimes it might sound like it's easier to hit, but are you seeing anything to hit? So do you start going out versus are guys challenging you, or are they nibbling more, or, versus at the major league level, as they frequently say, the transition seems to be, especially when a guy comes up and is on fire, everybody checks to see if he can hit a fastball. Yeah, well, chances are you wouldn't be here if you can hit a fastball. So, okay, first time around, guys are like, oh, we want to find this out for ourselves. But then do they start mixing in the breaking stuff? And is that the big adjustment for players? And is that what's inevitable for him? So far, I like the results. I like his approach. It's definitely way out of the norm for what the Yankees do, if that's either because they haven't had that need to, or they really haven't had a prospect like this in their system in quite some time. That the only excitement, I guess, is and don't cry for us, Argentina. It looks like they still could finish over 500, for every season since 1993. But there is at least some room for excitement there. But don't let that masquerade the fact that there are going to be some payroll problems. It is going to be hard to tweak that. So unless Dominguez, kind of finishes this year strong, obviously looks like he's going to be the starting center fielder next year and becomes, what you hope he is right away. And a couple other younger guys contribute. I think it could be a little bit of a rebuild for the Yankees over the next couple of years.
I hope they go over 500, only because I would be kind of annoyed. It would trigger me if they made it 29 years with straight over 500 and they couldn't get to 30. That would kind of annoy me as just a personal, need it to be an even number. You're going to go under 500, do it next year after you made it 30 straight years, Yankees. Okay, last baseball question, Phil. We're on Crosstown, Crosstalk. We do the White Sox and the Cubs surrounded by MLB chat. You touched on the White Sox. They stink. Everybody watching this knows that. But what is your perspective of the Chicago Cubs?
So the Cubs, I have a soft spot for the Cubs. Going to Wrigley was kind of was sort of the introduction to me where I figured out maybe I could do baseball photography. It was kind of the first stadium that I photographed and it was nice. So other than that, I mean, and this is going to be probably more of a casual answer, you look at it, 2016 doesn't feel like it's that long ago, but it does at the same time. And so it's fascinating to see for a team that should have been a dynasty, how it only turned into the one championship and kind of where all of those pieces have gone. So I know that they've been competitive this year where they weren't supposed to. And so it's I don't know if that's good or bad for them, for the sake that, when you look at what that foundation is versus, and not suggesting, although maybe somewhere in there, they think that going back to the model that worked to bring them to break a 108-year curse is the only way to do it. So it's very interesting to see that they've been competitive. I thought that maybe they were going to be sellers at the deadline, and the Yankees might have played into some of that. So obviously they kind of held on to their chips, and I think they're still sniffing around. But So it's, I look at it more from the perspective of it's interesting kind of how quickly, or if it is a precautionary tale, how quickly you can go from building a cost-controlled young core to just for whatever reason it not working. And so, one championship when it looked like I would have predicted that they would have been a dynasty. If that speaks volumes to, if your team does win a World Series, cherish it, and why general managers and teams will go all in if they think they've got one shot at it, versus why would you do that versus trying to build sustainability. What is sustainability in most markets? So,
absolutely. And I'll tell you, Bellinger, Swanson, they've been, and now they're starting to get more from like Suzuki and Happ have been hitting a lot more lately. I have questions about the rotation. They're going to run Justin Steele and Kyle Hendricks to start the first two games of the playoffs. And then after that, I think that job is still to be won with about 25-ish games left in the season. So it's going to be interesting for them. I think they win around. I'm going to predict them to beat the Phillies, I think. I don't know. I have a feeling they win around. And then after that, it's like, who could beat the Braves? If somebody can upset the Braves, then the National League is wide open. So I respect going for it. I wish my team would do that. The team on the other side of town is a dumpster fire. But Phil, before you leave, I have 2 non-baseball related questions. You going to partake in any football this season, or are you just not too interested?
Yeah, I am. I'm entering probably with less excitement than most seasons. So I am a Patriots fan. So kind of discussing a level of this earlier that in Bill we trust in some regards, but and same thing. Don't you can't really shed that many tears coming out of the era that we did, and not that you're trying to replace Tom Brady, but is it time to take the training wheels off of a Mac Jones and figure out what he can do, or does Bill hold that so close to his vest? That's kind of, I'm not certain what the plan has been, although indications, that the defense is strong. It's just the offense has been shoddy. Maybe a different approach in play calling than last year's dumpster fire, to borrow that term. There's some faith that I do have that if you're going to look at and tell me that the Dolphins, the Jets, and the Bills have all figured it out all of a sudden, I still think that the Earth is round, and so it's until I see that, we'll find out. So that opened an opportunity for the Patriots to kind of surprise some people, maybe. Not going to predict it. So, maybe just I've got to just watch the games for the sake of the games and be thankful I don't have any hair left to pull out.
It's funny you say that. The Earth might be flat now. You said that. I picked the Jets, Bills, and Dolphins to all make the playoffs, have 3 teams out of the division in the wild card for this upcoming season. And, man, the Patriots, they took advantage. And I used to love when people, because I'm a Tom Brady guy. He's my favorite athlete of all time. I used to, laugh. Oh, the people just say the Patriots, they dominate a bad division and they have a free bye every year in the playoffs. Okay, that free pass to the playoffs because they play in a stinky division didn't help them beat an all-time great Steelers defense. It didn't help them destroy the Ravens every time they played. It didn't help them keep Peyton Manning from being one of the greatest quarterback of all time, because every time the Colts looked like they were going to win the Super Bowl, they ran into the Patriots, and Peyton Manning had an underwhelming playoff career because of the Patriots, so you can't rip on them for being in the division. The world has kind of flipped on them a little bit, which is very interesting. But go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No, it's. I mean, like I said, it's. I think the frustration grows more from, and it could be just a little bit of being spoiled. But it's like, what is this plan? Why is it Bill's ego that's finally coming to roost on this? Thinking that okay, it's always, and I know the debate was always, was it Tom, was it Bill? My answer was it's it's yin and yang. They need each other, but obviously, the players that go and play, probably you give a little bit of a nod. So it's just what is the strategy? What is the plan moving forward? So I hope Bill can pull one out of his hat. If not, I think it's been a wasted 3-4 years here, and it's time to rebuild. But
absolutely, couldn't agree more. And take advantage of this little time that the other 3 teams are probably ahead of you a little bit. You have time to rebuild this thing the right way. And Joe says it perfectly. Cutting Zappe was a shock. I think that'll probably make Mac Jones be a little bit more confident. Maybe it'll help him play better. But Phil, we can't thank you enough for your time. I did say I had one more non-baseball related question. It's because every time I talk to you, I know you're not the most diehard hockey fan of all time, but I love it so much that I love having an Ottawa Senators friend. Playoffs, good team, excited for the season. Jake Sanderson, 8 years for $8.05 million last night. Wrote about that. What do you think?
I think the excitement in the market and in Ottawa is more around the fact that with a new ownership group that it feels like it is finally time to move forward. There is obviously some young pieces in there, and they're locking up. I actually got to a few games last year, and it was an exciting brand of hockey. And what my takeaway from it was that they were that high scoring offense that if they could rein a level of that in and just because they were taking chances and it paid off when they were going and attacking, versus it seemed like there was a lot of back and forth. Again, it was the most exciting brand of Senators hockey I've seen in the 21 years I've lived in this city. However, I could see where that obviously the playing a little bit more of a balanced game. And if they can do that, if that's a maturity thing, I don't even know if it's a personnel thing. It might be a maturity thing that they possibly could take a jump this year. So if they can keep the firepower going, but play a little bit more disciplined, I think they're a team that could be knocking on the door there. I know that that's not what most of the prognosticators think, or they don't think it's time yet. But anything like that could happen.
Anything could happen, and they have Tim Stützle, who is one of the best players in the NHL. From this moment forward, he will start to become, I think, a more nationally known star. I think he breaks 100 points this year. He was in the 90s, his true breakout year last year. But, Phil, we can't thank you enough for coming on our show. Tell everybody where they could read your stuff right now.
Yeah, across all the socials, Cuba Dugout, and at my website, cubadugout.com.
And make sure you follow him is it at Cuba Dugout? Sorry, is it at Phil Selig?
Across the board, so from YouTube to Twitter to Instagram to Facebook. So it's tried to make it as cohesive as possible and simple, so I don't get confused.
He's a very smart man and a great Twitter follow and a great follow on everything. Make sure you read his website. Make sure you follow me at Vinnie Parise. For our producer, Joe Mandel, thank you very much. It has been great to the audience. We can't thank you enough. Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Twitch, everywhere you could find this stuff. Make sure you go like and subscribe. Make sure you tune into the Barroom Network all weekend long, where we will be covering the National Football League. Let's go, Bears. Thank you for listening.
Another happy landing.